Welcome to the Brother Ill Show. On the morning show for today, on this morning show, we're going to focus on the family financial literacy programming. And the presenter today, my mentor, is Myron Golden. I'm gonna let him. We're just gonna tap straight in, and I'm gonna just let him do his thing.
Have you ever wondered what separates the 1% from everyone else? Obviously, there's something, and people always talk about the 1%. And it's interesting to me because people say the rich, as if rich people are just one person, right? The rich, right? And it's fascinating. Or there's one category of rich people, like there's one or white people or black people. Like there's only one avatar of black person, one avatar of white people, one avatar. Oh, men just, women just. It's so fascinating. I'll get into that in a minute because today I want to talk to you about the traits, 6 traits that separate the 1% from everyone else. As I'm going through these 6 traits, why don't you do this? Why don't you get a pen and paper as I'm going through these 6 traits, and as you write them down, the ones that you have, put a check mark beside them. The ones that you put a check mark beside them that you have them. Put the ones that you don't have, circle them and start working on them. See how your life changes. So, first of all, the secret psychology of the 1%. What is a secret? What is a secret? A secret is something that is not known or seen or not meant to be known or seen by others, by people other than the people you intend to know or see it. That's what a secret is. And so the secret psychology, there's a secret psychology? There's a secret psychology. What's psychology? The scientific study of the human mind and its functions, especially those affecting behavior in a given context. So what does that mean? That means it's a way of thinking. It's studying a way of thinking. If you want to think about psychology, it's studying a way of thinking. So when I talk about the secret psychology of the 1%, I'm talking about this. Users judge your site in no time. Way of thinking about things that a small group of people have, and they don't want other people to see it, and they don't want other people to know it. Well, I'm going to pull back the curtain because I heard somebody say, when you learn what the magician knows, it isn't magic anymore. So let's talk about the top 10, 1, 10, 5%, 0, 1% of income earners. Let's talk about earnings, because if you're in the top 1% as an athlete, you're going to be one of the top, you're going to be in the top 1% of income earners. If you're in the top 1% of business owners, you're going to be in the top 1% of income earners. If you're in the top 1% of authors, you're going to be in the top 1% of income earners. So the top 1% is not just money, right? But it almost always includes money. So let's talk about how much money the top 0.1% make, the top 1%, the top 5%, the top 10% make. And I got this off of some tax website. I don't even remember the name of it now. Man, I should have put that on here. Anyway, so the top 10% in America earn $167,639 a year. That's a fairly low number for it to only be 10%, right? Okay, right? I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it's not mega wealth. 160. I mean, it's decent income for sure. I mean, you can make less than that as decent income, right? So $167,639. That's the top 10%. The top 5% earn $335,891. The top 1%, according to this tax website that I found this on, makes $819,324. And the top 0.1% makes, that's 1% of 1%, so that's 1/100th of 1%, make $3,312,693 a year. Now, I would have thought that all of those numbers would have been bigger before I looked this up. Wouldn't you have thought that? Like, I'd have thought they'd been, like, people talk about those top 1%. When somebody says the 1%, you think they're talking about billionaires. No, these are people who make $3 million a year. They're not billionaires. That's not the top 1%. That's the top 1/100th of 1%. That's the top 1% of 1%. And the top 1% makes $819,000 a year. You'd think 1%, like the way they talk about the 1%, oh, they set it up, the 1%, they don't pay any taxes. Well, the 1% actually, anyway, that's another conversation for a different day, pays more taxes than the lower income because it's a percentage of your income. So anyway, so what are the things that separate the 1% from the other 99%? The 1% have a particular perspective. And what is that particular perspective? Well, that perspective of the 1% is the 1% stand up to stand out instead of falling in to fit in and be liked. They stand up to stand out instead of they stand up to stand out instead of falling in line to fit in and be liked. So the top 1% is more concerned with purpose than popularity. Now, sometimes your purpose will make you popular. Sometimes your purpose will make you unpopular. Like if you're going to have celebrators, you're going to have haters. Some people will never be in the top 1% because they can't stand it when there are people who don't like them. Am I telling the truth? Some people will never rise to the level of their potential because the pain of antagonists, haters, and trolls is too great. Now, I read a book a couple of years ago called Anti-Fragile. I would recommend it to all of you. 2 books like that will really help you develop this aspect of the 1%. One of them is called Anti-Fragile. And the whole premise of Anti-Fragile is this. The same wind that feeds a forest fire extinguishes a candle.
Families across Michigan trust High Point Virtual Academy of Michigan with their child's education. And it's easy to see why.
So what's the moral of that story? Don't be the candle, be the forest fire. That's the whole emphasis of Anti-Fragile in a nutshell. But the book was great. And it's worth reading. The other book is The Coddling of the American. In fact, I'm going to give you another one. The Coddling of the American Mind. I don't remember. I read it many years ago. Is the mind. I don't remember who wrote it. Our society, how our miseducational, misdirectional system, how our so-called institutions of higher learning and our government indoctrination camps, aka public school systems, are designed to make people mentally weak. And by the time they become adults, they can't do anything. That's why you have now, if you have these people now who, if someone's attempting to have a conversation with them, they'll just throw a tantrum and start screaming so they don't have to listen to anything. I would be aware of people who are afraid of opposing opinions. So one of these days I need to do a whole video on how to win an argument every time. It'll be a really short video. Here's what you do. Be right and don't care about the consequences. Right? And you may not win the argument in everybody's mind, but you won. Why? Because there is no argument against the truth. Right? Anyway, one of the ways you can tell if somebody has a valid point is if they call the opposing voices a name to discredit them instead of addressing their argument. It's in rhetoric, it's called an ad hominem fallacy. So An ad hominem fallacy is if Ed and I are having a conversation and Ed disagrees with me and I want to discredit Ed because I know he's right and I know I can't win, I just call him a racist. Now everybody will stop listening to him. You can call him a sexist. You make up a term, or there already is one, and you call them the name, and the name that you called them now means that they're disqualified and their opinion holds no value. Ad hominem fallacy. Like now you start looking for it when you're watching anything, when you're having a conversation with somebody. If their only retort is to call someone a name, it's because they know their argument is weak. Or maybe their argument's just weak and they don't even know their argument's weak, and they're resorting to using an ad hominem fallacy even though they don't know that they're using it. Okay, anyway. So the top 1% doesn't care, though. Top 1% is not going along to get along. The top 1% does not sign the banana and be one of the bunch. The top 1% stands on what they believe to be the truth regardless of consequences. They're not going along to get along. The top 1% doesn't just do what everybody else is doing because everybody else is doing it. And if you're one of those people who goes along to get along, signs banana to be one of the bunch, and you don't want anybody to be like disappointed with you, you want everybody to be happy with you, just resolve to know that there's no possible way with that mindset that you will ever be one of the 1%. It can't happen. Why? Because you have to have the ability to stand in the face of adversity if you are going to be one of the 1%. So the second trait, that was trait number 1. Do you have it? And you know if you have it, are you a people pleaser? See, what we don't realize is God put us here to please God and serve people, not to please people and serve God. Mm-hmm. So they have a particular perspective. They harness personal power. What does that mean? That means the 1% recognize the difference between contributing factors and determining factors. And the 1% do not attempt to control situations and circumstances, but focus instead on controlling themselves. I cannot control what happens to me. I can control what I'm going to do next, what meaning I'm going to assign to the thing that happened to me, and what I'm going to focus on. Those are the things I can control. I have no control over whether or not somebody runs into the back of my car. I can't control them. But I can control what I do if someone runs into the back of my car. I can't control whether somebody says something bad about me. I can control what I'm going to do if somebody says something bad about me. I can't control negative trolling comments on Instagram and YouTube and X and all the rest of those platforms, but I can control what I'm going to do when somebody posts a negative comment. And I'm not going to go melt and sit on the floor in my bathroom and cry. Why? Because of the first point that I already gave you. I'm not looking for votes. I don't have to be politically correct. I would rather be right than politically correct. Anyway, so we focus on factors that we can control. And we don't focus on factors we can't control. We recognize that there's a difference between contributing factors and determining factors. Now, some of y'all ain't gonna like this, but that's all right. You'll either grow to like it or you'll stay stuck like Chuck. It's your choice. So there are 2 types of factors in every circumstance. How many types? 2. 2 types of factors in every circumstance. There are contributing factors and there are determining factors. You want to live a miserable life? Go through life believing that contributing factors are determining factors. You will be miserable your whole life because you can't control contributing factors, but you can control determining factors. Here's how you can tell the difference between a contributing factor and a determining factor. All contributing factors are outside of you. All determining factors are inside of you.
Do not pay somebody to build you a Shopify store because I'm going to do it free with 20 handpicked products by.
What does that even mean, Myron? That means if somebody runs into the back of my car, that's a contributing factor. It contributed to the experience of my day. If I spend the rest of my day moping because somebody ran into the back of my car, then I chose to take a contributing factor and turn it into a determining factor because now I've internalized it. I was talking to the folks this morning who are here in studio, before we got started, and I was telling him when I was walking over here from my office to the studio, I became aware of this thought that I had, and I thought to myself, how it looks to people when I walk. I had polio as an infant. How it looks to people when I walk feels very different to me than it looks to you. Because to me, it just feels like I'm walking like it feels like to you when you're walking. My walking doesn't feel any different to me than your walking feels to you. But my walking looks different to you, and it looks different to me than it feels to me. Are y'all tracking? And then I had this thought. I'm so glad I had polio as an infant. How weird is that thought? It's weird if you don't understand that contributing factors happen to give us the opportunity to use our determining factors to conclude, so we can come to a conclusion that's either empowering or disempowering. And see, disempowering, when I look at the contributing factors of my life and I start looking for who's to blame, I start pointing fingers, and it's this person's fault and that person's fault. And so if every problem in my life is in my life because of something going on out there, then the only thing that can fix my problems is a fix that comes from out there. That's why there's so many people waiting for their ship to come in, while the 1% are swimming out to get it. The difference is you don't wait for circumstances to change. You just change the circumstances while other people wait. That's the difference. The difference is you accept the things you cannot change, but you change the things you can. And if you'll do that, man, it's game on. Like, all of us have equalizers built into us, like built-in equalizers, so that we can level the playing field. Why? Well, I'm going to get to that later on. I don't want to give it away ahead of time. So this is a different kind of perspective. If you're a person who thinks that your life is bad because of the government, you're a citizen, your life is bad because of the government, you don't have any hope of being one of the 1%. If you're black and you think that your life is bad because of white people, you have no hope of being one of the 1%. If you are white and you think your life is bad because of black people or minorities or somebody who's not white person, you have no hope of being one of the 1%. If you're a man and you think your life is bad or difficult because of women, there's no hope for you to become one of the 1%. If you're poor and you believe you're poor because rich people are rich and it's rich people's fault that you're poor, you have no hope of being one of the 1%. If you're a woman and you think your life is bad because of men, you have no hope of being one of the 1%. If you think your life is bad because your parents didn't treat you good, there's no hope of you becoming one of the 1%. The only way for you to become one of the 1% is for you to take personal responsibility for every outcome. You don't have to take personal responsibility for every input, but you have to take personal responsibility for every outcome. And until you do that, your chances of becoming 1% part of the 1% are slim to none, and Slim has just left the building. Okay. So that's the first two. They have a particular perspective. They harness their personal power. They have a peculiar perspective rather. They harness their personal power. They have particular practices. The 1% focus on mindsets and methodologies that produce mastery instead of mediocrity. So let me say that again. So the top 1% have particular practices in our minds, in our methodologies. The top 1% focus on mindsets and methodologies that produce mastery. Mindsets and methodologies that produce mastery. And those mindsets and methodologies that produce mastery help us escape from mediocrity. What does mediocrity mean? Mediocrity comes from the root word what? Medium. What's medium? In the middle. What's the middle? It's not good, it's not bad, it's just kind of there. It's not great, it's not terrible, it's just okay. It's not excellent, it's not terrible. It's just average. Most people never escape from average. Why? Because they don't focus on mindsets and methodologies that produce mastery. And so therefore, they're left to spend the rest of their lives in mediocrity. What is mastery? What is mastery? Like I said, mindsets and methodologies that produce mastery. Oh, he's just being alliterated. No, he's not. Mastery is real. So, what is mastery? Mastery is the ability to execute effortlessly without the use of conscious resources. How do you gain mastery in an arena? I'm going to quote my daughter Dee Dee because she has some of the best quotes ever, and this is one of my favorites. Kind of wish I'd have thought of it, but I got to give credit where credit is due. You have to practice it purposefully until you can practice it passively. Let me say that one more time. You have to practice it purposefully until you can practice it passively. It's like learning how to play the guitar. You learn how to change chords, and it takes so much intention to change chord, or piano, or keyboard. It seems so, like when you're watching somebody do it, it seems impossible until you learn how to do it, and then you're like, why did I ever think this was hard? Do you realize everything right now that you perceive as difficult in your life, you could literally develop a mindset that says, okay, I'm going to master this, and then have a methodology for mastery, and then just keep on doing that repeatedly over and over again until it becomes second nature. So one of the things I'm learning right now is I already know them, but I'm learning I don't have them mastered, is all the notes on the fretboard of the guitar. So if guitar has, depending on the guitar, one of my guitars, I'll just talk about one of my guitars. One of my guitars has 6 strings and 22 frets. So whatever 6 times 22 is, what is that, 132? Right? I think that's 132. So 6 times 22 is 132. There are 132 different, there's 12 different notes. There are 12 different notes, but there are 132 different positions for those notes on the guitar. My objective is to master, to be able to look at a note anywhere on the guitar and know exactly what note it is in less than a fraction of a second. If you don't do that, you can't master a guitar because chords are built from notes. And so once you know that, for instance, C, E, and G make a C chord, right? Because the first, third, and the fifth make a C chord. Once you know that, then all I have to do is find a C, E, and G everywhere on the fretboard, and I can make C's all up and down the neck. But all of that, it has to be built through a concept that I call mastery stacking. You want a methodology that will change your life? Mastery plus mastery stacking can make you one of the 1% in your arena. So what's mastery? So how do you develop mastery? So what you do, so we have this thing called the circle of fifths. So I take my E string, my low E string. I should have brought my guitar in here, but I didn't know I was going to do this. So I take my low E string and I go C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, F sharp, B, E, A, D, G. And I do it again. C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, F sharp, B, E, A, D, G. And I do it again. And I do that. If I do that, like you could literally, anybody could memorize or know, it's more than memorizing, could know intuitively every note on the fretboard. Even if you've never played the guitar before, if you practice the circle of fifths, let's say I'll give you 6 weeks, you could master every note on the fretboard. You could do it in 6 days. But let's say you did the low E string 100 times a day for 1 week. And then you did the A string 100 times a day for 1 week. And then you did the D string 100 times a day for a week. If you did all 6 strings 100 times a day for a week, at the end of 6 weeks, you'd have the entire fretboard mastered. So week 1, that's mastery of the E string. Week 2, would be mastery of the A string. Now I've stacked my mastery of the A string on top of my mastery of the E string. And what happens when you do mastery stacking, it's how people learn to juggle. It's how people learn to do gymnastics. You master one component at a time. And once you have that component mastered, then you go and you learn to master another component. And then you stack one component on top of another component, on top of another component, on top of another component, until you have the whole thing mastered. And then before you know it, the whole thing's effortless. So that's called mastery stacking. But what most people do, Josh, I need you to cool it off in here for me, 2 degrees at least. Okay. So what most people do is most people stack a lack of clarity on top of a lack of clarity. This is where overwhelm comes from. The reason you feel overwhelmed is because you haven't mastered anything. And so what most people do, here's what the average person does. They'll learn a little bit about a lot of things, and then they'll attempt to put a conglomerate of all these things they know a little bit about together, and it's like a house of cards. And when they put the last piece on top, the whole thing collapses. That's how most people learn. Yeah, but the 1% don't do that. The 1% they do mastery of one component at a time, and then stack mastery on top of mastery on top of mastery on top of mastery. You find anybody who's great at anything, that's how they became great. Okay. Segmentation to completion is another one of those things that I call that. But mastery stacking is a method of segmenting until completion. Segmentation until completion. Okay. So they have the 1% have particular practices. What are those particular practices? They focus on mindsets and methodologies that produce mastery and escape mediocrity. That was number 3. Number 4, the 1% have persevering. They have a persevering persistence. The things that cause 99% of the people to quit cause them to quicken. What's quicken mean? Quicken means to come alive. The thing that causes other people to feel like, oh no, this is so terrible. I can't believe it. I wish I would have never started this thing. Right? The thing that causes most people to do that, like said, causes the 1% to say, okay, it's time to get in gear now. Huh? When the going gets tough, what do tough do? They get going. Let's go. Let's go. All right, it's on now. Right? It's the thing that separates the 1%. A persevering persistence. Like we will not allow anything to bend our will. We bend everything to our will.
My hosting a WooCommerce store earns me money all day, every day. I'm Gabrielle Scarlett.
Are y'all picking up what I'm putting down on the YouTube, in the YouTube sphere out there? Are y'all tracking? Are y'all with me? So the top 1% have a persevering persistence. Like, they just don't quit. One of the things you'll notice, a lot of people who become millionaires, they'll say, oh yeah, man, I was rich once and I lost everything. That's so common. And then they climb back up. Why? Because they have a persevering persistence. Like, person who won't be stopped can't be stopped. I'm so glad. Plumbing Inspired by James Golden. I don't know who that is, but I love that name. That just gets me going every time, because my dad was James Golden. He was a plumber, and so somebody has the. Whoever you are, tell me your name so I can know who you are. Plumbing Inspired by James Golden, because my dad taught me something when I was in elementary school. James Golden taught me something when I was in elementary school. Here's what he said. He and I were working on a car. It was an old flood car. Had this exhaust manifold, had this rusted on bolt. It wouldn't come off. My mom called us for lunch. We were going in the house. I can literally, when I'm talking about this, I can see me and my dad walking across the yard, getting ready to go into the house. My mom calls us for lunch. And I said, Dad, the bolt don't come out. It's not coming out. He said, oh, it's coming out. It's coming out. He said, you want to know why it's coming out, boy? Yes, sir. Because we got a brain that don't have a brain. I'm like, oh, okay. And so from that point on, I realized if I am working on something that doesn't have a brain, it can't beat me. It can't beat me. Like, there's nothing that can't think that can beat a person who can think if they're willing to what? Think. But most people don't think. What? They just think they think. Think about that. So You gotta, if you like, by the way, don't forget what I said at the beginning of this video. As you're going through these 6 traits of the 1%, check the ones you have, circle the ones you don't have. The ones you don't have, start working on them. And then give yourself some time, you'll be in the 1%. Number 4, the top 1% in every arena have positivity in the presence of problems. The top 1% flip the script that the 99% focus on. Did you get that?
Thank you for joining us on the Brother Ill Show. Be sure to visit us at www.brotherill.com for more exclusive content. Peace and have a productive Sunday.